Hello, my name is Hannah. Welcome back to I Can Fix America. This is my co-host.
Hello, I'm Sylvia.
Who also happens to be my mother. And this
Proud mother.
This is the second ever episode of our podcast. So, how do we feel about the first episode now that it's out?
Yeah, I feel good about it. I think it was nice to talk to you. I think it was nice to get some feedback. And I'm looking forward to more conversations about politics and young people out there.
See, she's only saying this because she didn't have to moderate all the comments. Not true. That there were that many of them, but more of them were, how do we say, hostile than I would have liked them to be. But you know what? That's the internet, and that's politics.
What can you do? You will always get the haters and the criticisms and all of that.
Exactly. And if my biggest hater is someone with a Pepe the Frog, profile picture, I think I'll be able to live.
I think you should take that as a compliment, actually.
True. Okay, so this episode, we have a new controversial question coming your way. And this time, it's very centered around the 2024 election. I'm going to be asking, was Kamala actually brat? Now, there is an issue with this question. That issue is...
What is brat?
Exactly. That is a major issue. Do you want to go take a swing at the answer and then...
Well, absolutely. When Hannah told me that was going to be the next question, I started asking around because I have teenagers in my life and I work with young people. So I had a sense of what brat is. And I also very much enjoy music, so I follow the music industry a bit. But still I noticed that when I began to ask people to give me some definitions, I got some rather vague stuff, and I came away with the idea that basically when your generation talks about brat, what we used to say was cool. Well, I know that's a provocative statement.
It's good to start with this because that is wrong. And I'm going to explain what brat actually means according to me.
Please do.
As we know, the internet's #1 online dictionary. So, brat comes from the name of an album by Charlie XCX, who is wonderful. And it's just a amazing, wonderful album that, beyond just being really good music, really ingrained itself into this past year's zeitgeist, the whole culture. And I think obviously you could see it as just, if you say, oh, someone is brat, you could see it as them being cool. But I think that would be an oversimplification because it's an oversimplification of the album in general. I think when you listen to the album, you see that while it has this very cool exterior, like these dance beats and just a lot of very confident lyrics and imagery. However, if you look at a lot of the actual content, there's a lot of more difficult topics. So you'll have the most famous example of this are the two tracks back to back. One is about cocaine and the other is about motherhood, and how Charlie XCX talks about her conflict with wanting to be a mother, but also wanting to be successful as an artist.
And how does cocaine play into that?
Well, that's a different song. But what's important about that is the juxtaposition. You have these big party anthems, but within that you have these stories about guilt and grief and the sense of loss for something you want but are not sure you'll be able to have. Mm-hmm. So I think how I would summarize brat is, if you call something brat, it's a lot about this idea of sincerity disguised as this more detached coolness. So we live in a very, I think, cynical culture at the moment where it's not really cool to care. But brat, for me, touches on something that is cool because it acts cool, but also because there's something more to it.
Okay.
And that brings us to how brat became part of the political landscape, which is when Kamala Harris started her sort of unorthodox campaign for presidency only, 2 months before the election?
Yes, she probably had 100 days at the most to get ready.
Yeah, and then basically, I think it must have been the same day. This was back when I was still on Twitter also, which some people call X, but I refuse to. And Charlie XCX, she tweeted on that day, Kamala is brat, with the is in all caps. So kind of almost implying she's the definition of what brat is.
Yeah.
Or like the essence of what brat is.
Kind of an endorsement coming from Charlie XCX.
I think you can call it it certainly was an endorsement. I just think it's more than that as well. So, like, as soon as she tweeted this was almost immediately adopted into the campaign imagery. So, like, the example that I saw quoted most was the Twitter header for the Kamala headquarters campaign was changed right away to reflect the style of the album. So the kind of iconic green with the sort of blurry letters spelling out Kamala HQ. And it does sort of seem to imply that Kamala Harris was, in some ways, at least trying to appeal to the young people.
Oh, absolutely. I think that was, their conscious strategy, that they thought, okay, let's use this very popular singer and that term that is right now cool among that generation. Not necessarily meaning cool, but it was kind of cool, right? I remember lots of posts about it and hearing people talk about it. And they thought that by doing that, they could appeal to young voters. And that's my first problem with it, but we can talk about that.
How did that end up working out for her?
I think we can safely agree that it didn't work, right?
It did not.
It did not work. The appeal to young voters, I mean, since we talked the last time, I read a couple more, or familiarized myself with some more statistics, the famous exit polls with specific questions, and it just confirmed what we were saying last time, that they really lost with the young generation. And what I found interesting, because part of me was like, okay, maybe it was because of a lower voter turnout among that generation, but what we now know is that in the actual swing states, right, the key battleground states, the voter turnout was higher. So that as an excuse, as an explanation, is also no longer relevant. And that really means that something dramatically went wrong.
Means we can't just blame the lefties, as
Absolutely not.
So many people love to do.
Yeah.
Not you. I know you love the lefties.
Of course I do.
No, but so basically all this to say, when we're asking whether Kamala was actually brat, we want to explore how political campaigns have used the internet in the past, how they're using it now, and what that means for the future of politics, what that means for just our values in general, and how that shifts with these new mediums, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. That's kind of like the conversation we want to have today. So, do we want to start with the past? Seems like a good place to start.
We could, yes, we could.
Yeah.
So you want to talk about how the internet and the digital revolution, how that was used in politics from its early stages on? Should we start with kind of some impressions about that, or?
I think that would be good, especially to establish whether there have been past attempts to utilize the internet in political campaigns in a successful way, so that then we can see, when we have now with Kamala Harris perhaps a less successful example, and with Trump a more
very
successful.
successful. Yeah, I think we can say a very successful example. I mean, that's there is so much that happened in that realm that played out very well for the Trump campaign. And where you can see that they utilized that medium extremely well. I think that just has to be acknowledged. In the preparation for this, when I read a bit more about it, that reminded me that one of my plans for the future, I think I mentioned last time that I'm also a historian and that I teach, and I would love to actually develop a course, like a lecture course on the digital revolution and its various outcomes or impacts on society, and of course also on politics. I think that's absolutely fascinating. And what we do see is that it's not a complete new thing that the Trump campaign did so well with that. There is in history a phenomenon that especially the far right actually has been quite successful at utilizing this medium from the very beginning. And I think, interesting enough, I think it actually had something to do that it granted them in the beginnings, right? This possibility of doing things in a kind of anonymous way, kind of hidden away from the broad public limelight. But that meant that they almost were pioneers in getting acquainted with that and utilizing it.
It's less of a controlled space, right? There's less, there are less norms you need to adhere to. And that's actually, I think it's interesting that you brought that up, because I was reading a bit how when movies were first invented, one of the first and most infamous movies, in American culture at least, is in 1915, Birth of a Nation,
yes.
which I personally have never seen, but I've heard there's a lot of KKK stuff in a very positive light.
Absolutely, yes.
And this inspired the KKK to start film companies that produce propaganda, such as in 1923, The Toll of Justice, and in 1924, The Traitor Within. So there's, like you said, there's this there's a precedent, and I think you mentioned before visual mediums, like with the radio and stuff?
Well, actually the radio, I mean, what I had mentioned was that in Nazi Germany, which is later, right? So,
right.
But what you see there is that the Nazis also were very good at utilizing new modern means of communication. So people who look at the Nazis and think that they were these traditionalists who wanted to go back to the past and everything about them was anti-modern, like, you know, they famously moved strongly against modern art, for example, and that is of course correct. But they also were in many aspects a very modern organization, and that is one of the things that they were path-breaking in many ways, right? Their propaganda tactics. And one thing that they were especially good at was utilizing new means of communication, utilizing them and of course also controlling them. So, right, there are two questions here. One, are you good at using this new device or this new medium for your own messaging? And the second question is, can you somehow prevent other people, your opponents, your political opponents, to do the same? And of course the Nazis did both. Right, very well from their perspective. They completely
I don't think just from
made
their
it impossible. Yeah,
made it basically
right. They
succeeded, right?
They did it. They made it impossible for the political opposition to continue with their own messaging through censorship, etc. And at the same time, they really put a lot of effort in propaganda, and that was, among other things, also through radio, because they made radio accessible for so many everyday Germans.
Yeah. And you can see very much that with more modern figures of the alt-right, they very much still uphold that idea. One thing I thought was fascinating was that the earliest example of a presidential campaign website was during the Clinton and Dale election in 1996. And the very same year, this guy, Don Black, who was a former KKK Grand Wizard, he creates Stormfront, this site that's kind of like synonymous with the alt-right online presence. So they were right there. And I couldn't find anything similar from the left when I was researching about politics online and stuff like that.
Yeah. No, I mean, the radical right around that time, I think, is in a position where they have very little political power, right? I mean, the extreme right really suffered a dramatic blow in 1945. Right? The utter destruction of Nazi Germany and the utter downfall, and then, of course, the fact that everyone saw what this regime had led to, this moral bankruptcy with millions of people being killed in the Holocaust and in their various war crimes, had a dramatic effect that some people even argued, okay, fascism is just dead. It's not going to have a return because you can't come back from something like that, right? And so when in the 60s is when it's the time that the political left, the so-called new left, really rises up and runs away with so many topics and slowly but surely enters the political power system. That doesn't happen for the radical right. The radical right kind of, they have their groups and they try, but they they lose that cultural war. What I mean by cultural wars, I mean they're not able to occupy powerful cultural spheres and places where they could send out their message and then win more and more supporters. And then
at least not mainstream.
Right. Yes,
yeah.
but you know, I mean that's
what
what yes, but you know, you want to somehow
yeah
reach out to the mainstream. And I think what's interesting is then in the 80s, when all of that starts with the internet and the digital revolution, they immediately jump on that, as I said, because they're kind of in a weak position, and that allows them to communicate with each other kind of out of the public eye. They don't have to worry so much about being found out, because the surveillance and everything is not strong there. It's kind of an uncontrolled space, and you know what you said before, and as a result of that, they are able to get really good at that. Yeah, so long history of utilizing that.
Yeah. So I guess the next question then is, how do you get from the somewhere in the 1990s the alt-right using these kind of, at this point, not these still in development internet platforms.
Yeah.
How do you get from that, so sort of in the shadows activism, if you want to call it that, or activity, to in 2016 Trump being elected and everything that was sort of hidden behind these tactics that they had coming into full view? I have a few things that I was reading about strategy-wise, but
let's hear it. No.
One thing that I really noticed throughout is the alt-right has this strategy of trying to shift the Overton window. And this was...
You might want to explain what the Overton window is.
It's funny, because that was sort of a term that when I was, like, younger, like, first getting involved with politics, at least online, like 12 or 13, I thought the Overton window was, like, this term that everyone used, that it was like a political term, but it does originate online. So that was a very real example of experiencing real time this alt-right language coming into the political space. But basically the Overton window is this idea, like if you see politics on a spectrum, left, right, there is a window where within that window on the spectrum is where the acceptable public discourse is. And there are ways to shift that window, and that was what the right wanted to do. They would do things like, I mentioned this before, Pepe the Frog, right? This was a meme. I don't know if saying the word meme works anymore, but it was, I guess, a meme. Or, for example, the OK symbol as well with your hands. Like, I probably shouldn't do it. Where it was something kind of that everybody used, but then suddenly it started having these alt-right connotations. And it was this idea that if you can get these jokes into the mainstream, to get, as they would call them, the normies to know about the joke, that was a small inch towards the...
And ultimately it would influence the larger conversation, right? And what is so interesting about that is that this is a strategy that is very reminiscent of a strategy that existed long before that, but minus the medium of the internet. And it reminds me of the whole conversation about influencing so-called meta-politics. And meta-politics is basically not, you know, exclusively to the right or to the left. It is something that all political groups who want to put something on the agenda, in theory, can use and have used. And it's basically the idea that you don't influence the culture or the political conversation directly, for example, by sending people into elections, into election campaigns, and really very clearly demanding we need to talk about ABC. Instead, you stay somewhat out of the political process, but you work towards changing the conversation that exists in a society by introducing topics, terms that you think would be important that people start talking about, and that kind of bring with themselves these terms a certain politics and a certain political attitude. And this sounds so theoretical, so let me just give you a concrete example. So right now, the alt-right and the radical right in Europe, they really have been pushing for the topic of looking at immigration as a dangerous thing, right? So they want people to start talking about that as a problem and raise the fear level. And also they want people to begin talking about possible deportations. Right? So deportations is a kind of somewhat a dangerous word. At least it used to be. So in Europe, it immediately awakens all these associations of Nazi Germany and how they deported people and to these terrible fates. So what do? They invent other terms. And this is where the term remigration was brought into the political debate. And I recently read, and this is now based on European politics, but one of the persons on the far right in Europe was extremely happy when he saw that word is now being used in mainstream media just to discuss things, even if they use it in a very critical manner and just report, okay, they are pushing for this, but what remigration really means is just deportations in an inhumane manner. They still think that's a success for us because we changed the debate. We got people to talk about this.
You know what? I just made a connection here, or I'm sure, Richard Spencer in 2008, when he coins the term alt-right, which we're both using
exactly
because that's kind of the term now.
Yeah.
But that was total an attempt to rebrand, and even at the start when people were having in 2008 I was 2 years old, so I don't remember this. Yeah. But maybe do you remember these debates about the term?
Maybe not from that particular time period, but because I do a lot of research on the European so-called New Right, I of course also followed that somewhat, and I just remember this debate also then among academic circles and other circles. Should we call them the alt-right? Should we call them the New Right? Isn't that already a euphemism? And that is a valid debate. I have decided to adopt the terminology.
Because it is a new sort
you're exactly right. At the end of the day, I think it makes sense because they are not exactly like the Nazis or the Italian fascists, or there is something new about them. So just like the term New Left makes sense to me, the term New Right does make sense to me as well.
This doesn't really add anything to the conversation, but I watched somewhere on YouTube, which, again, so this might be completely wrong, but someone made the association that it was alt-right, like alt-rock. They were trying to do this sort of we're cool, we're not your parents' conservatives.
Actually, but you know what? That's such an important point in all of this, because the New Right and the alt-right, they want to be cool. They want to be brat. Only
they do not want to be.
They want to use their version of brat. Exactly. They don't want to use that term, but whatever term exists in their universe, that's really important to them. So if you look at their style, and that's also not something new. There was always something about, for example, fascist style. They were very strong at that, and so I think it makes a lot of sense to see these trends now play out in that world. In some ways you can see them mirroring each other, the radical left and the radical right, of course with completely different content, but in terms of the methods that are being used, the strategies. And what I find fascinating about the alt-right and the New Right, they make no secret out of the fact that they are happy to adopt practices from the far left. Yeah, so for example, what I talked about with the meta-politics, the persons who developed that in Germany, now I'm talking about the 80s, 90s and so on, they literally said in their writings, in their published writings, that we can use some Marxist terminology because it's associated with this Italian Marxist scholar Gramsci, and that's fine. We just fill it with our content, but the strategy itself is neutral, right? So we might as well use it.
And that's weird, because I could not imagine any left-leaning group doing that, being... maybe, but it seems to me that because these strategies on the right in general often seem to be the going low in the if they go low we go high mantra, I think there's a lot more hesitation on the left to want to go low in response to other people going low.
Kind of how low do you want to go?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you have to differentiate between the radical left and the mainstream left, because I think on the radical left you also have some openness for certain strategies where, as I said, where I can see a mirror effect.
So, unless we have something more on that,
I think we're good on that.
did think we could now move to 2016. Trump gets elected, right? And then what's big then is the Overton window is officially shifted.
Yeah.
A lot of these people come out and are feeling a lot more confident in just being openly racist, sexist, anti-Semitic. Pick your poison. Like,
Yeah.
they're doing it.
And they're being told, good people.
Yeah, good
on
people
both
on both sides.
Yeah.
I think the most often cited consequence of this, beyond just Trump getting elected, is Charlottesville, right? And that sort of brings this backlash, because you literally have people going around with tiki torches, right? Screaming, "Jews will not replace us." And there is a bit of a return back into hiding, but this damage has been done.
And there's a return back into hiding, but also there is a disillusionment with Trump, right? Which is interesting, because Trump, during his first presidency, in the beginning, there is a lot of happy expectations that are rising up among the radical right. And by the way, also in Europe. I followed that very closely, and I remember, well, these expectations, okay. Because, the European New Right is very critical of America, and many of them hate America and want to hate America and look at it as this symbol of everything that is wrong with the world. But then they were like, oh, wait a second. They actually are electing a person who represents ideas that we think are good. But then Trump doesn't deliver as much as they want him to, right? And that leads to a certain disillusionment. And you see that in Richard Spencer very dramatically, right? And in other people, and you also see that overseas.
Yeah.
Because here's the thing, we shouldn't talk too much about the radical right, because at the end of the day, Trump, already in 2016, of course, but also in 2020, with the attempt to suggest to so many people that this election was stolen from him, the second one, and then now in 2024, it's the mainstream that they are able to reach. The bulk of the supporters are not, in my opinion, people who are on the radical right, but people who, like we said last time, are worried about the economy or the lack of strength that the United States represents in their eyes in the world, etc. Abortion, and he is able to reach them, right?
Yes.
As well as
But what
the
I
other
would
ones.
argue is, just because we're talking today about politics online, I think a lot of the reason why Trump is able to reach this not alt-right, conservative mass, is because the alt-right created these spaces online to talk about that. Because if you look at, I was only barely on the internet in 2016, but there you had this huge dominance in so many different places, in the, atheist spaces, and the anti-feminist spaces, and the gym bro spaces.
Gym bro spaces?
Gym bro, gym, going to the gym.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And so, at this point, the alt-right has shifted the Overton window so much that there is this framework in place for then Trump in 2024 to go on these podcasts.
Yeah, I completely agree, but except for I want to clarify something. Let's not give the alt-right too much credit here, and let's not forget Trump himself and his advisors and his political strategists, because at the end of the day, these were not places that they now used. These were not places that were all created by the alt-right. What did Trump do when he was banned from Twitter? He created his own thing. And what comes in here is what I said before, that one, you have to be good at utilizing these spaces, these new mediums, but second, you need the power to control them. Now, when you are banned from a place, like Twitter or Facebook, and you have the means, the financial means, and the foresight that you say, what, I'm just going to create my own now, which is something that he did.
Yeah.
And then was able to have millions and millions of users come and flock to that site, right? That's also, I hate to say it, but we need to acknowledge that he's very good at what he's doing there. There is also the factor of that, at least I believe that, of the individual Trump. He is someone who has very good political instincts, especially when it comes to propaganda and bringing across populist messages. You know what I mean?
I mean, I do get what you're saying, and I think for me the answer is probably somewhere in between. Like, I do think a lot of the spaces Trump utilizes, of course, that comes from his own, like you said, political instincts and the political circumstances he created. But I just don't think that the online sphere would be so accessible to him if there hadn't been this huge culture shift.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Like, if you if you look at some of the people he went on the podcasts with, take your, like, Aiden Ross. Yeah, that wasn't a podcast, that was a live stream. But Aiden Ross, I mean, Aiden Ross is someone who has platformed Nick Fuentes. So there are these connections there where you see, okay, it's not like he's tapping into the alt-right, but he is tapping into places that they have strong influence in.
Absolutely.
Indirect sometimes, but I think very conscious.
And he also, he has that person who has been hired by his campaign. Yeah, his name is Alex Brusewitz. Not much out there about him, but he kind of came out strongly in 2020 pro-Trump, really working hard to spread the myth that the election was flawed and that Biden didn't really win, etc., all that nonsense. And he also is the co-founder of so-called X Strategies, which is an institution that can be hired for political campaigning. And they were hired now by the Trump campaign. He was the one who was in touch then with Barron,
Barron
Trump's son.
So we have talked a lot about the alt-right and the right online. I do think it's only fair that we talk a bit about what the left and, the liberals have done online, because that was my space for like the last 8 years of my life. Have I really been online that long?
I know. I what can I do? It's one field where I lost as a mother.
Nah.
Yeah,
I have great experiences
like 10.
So the political spaces online that I grew up in were BreadTube, which is leftist YouTube, which was naturally made in response to the fact that YouTube had been a platform, politically at least, dominated very much by the right. So it was certainly a response.
YouTube also.
Yeah, YouTube was a mess.
Yeah.
But it does make me think, obviously I've experienced that the Democrats do use online mediums. I also know that in 2008, Obama literally, but he was the first person to really tap into the online spaces as a form of campaigning. Someone said it was called the Facebook election.
I remember once he was elected, I think, then I noticed that he would go on to, I don't think they were podcasts, but Between the Ferns, for example, right? Isn't that what it was called? Between Two Ferns. That was something new,
but that's
right?
something Hillary Clinton did right before, as part of her campaign as well.
Oh, did she? Yeah. So see, because that's the other thing that I think at one point we must talk about. There is also the fact that it's just a medium. It's just a medium. And just like with any other medium that was once brand new, be it television or radio or the printing press, just with any other medium, mediums are per se somewhat neutral. And that throws us back to the fact that isn't it at the end of the day the message itself that matters and how you are able to sell it?
Yeah.
I just think that the liberals and the Democrats, especially in this most recent election, just weren't good at that. And I think the brat strategy was really poorly thought out. Well, we can talk more about that towards the end.
Okay, yeah, because I
don't want to sidetrack this now. Yes.
Just to clarify, do you think at this point, let's say before 2016, was the more liberal side of the internet kind of trailing behind? Like, do you think the right and the alt-right were pioneers?
Here's what I know. I know that the radical right back in the 20th century in the 80s and 90s pioneered these spaces for political purposes, because they were not really explored for political purposes much by the mainstream politicians, and I also don't think by the radical left. Then, to be honest, I'm not so sure. I mean, I think that the Obama campaign was very good at using that. I remember lots and lots of Facebook posts and messaging, and Facebook was, the main thing back then. But then again, when does the whole bubble thing start, right? That you as a user really only because of algorithms get to see your side. What I do think is that the Obama campaign was able to score these victories because they were able to communicate well. And I think that there was a populist element in Obama that just was very appealing to mainstream America. And it was approachable, because let's not forget, there are people out there in this country who voted for Obama twice and now voted for Trump twice.
Yes.
So that needs explanation, right? And the explanation is not that they were secretly alt-right people.
Yeah.
That's just that's just nonsense.
That's also I think liberals aren't great at this, but I do specifically want to yell at the lefties here for a sec. As a proud lefty myself, proud is overdoing it.
Yes.
As a reluctant lefty myself, I feel like you can't say all the Trump supporters are basically fascists and neo-Nazis and are burning crosses in people's front yards and stuff, when you have that they voted for Obama. I'm not saying they're not racist. I'm sure there's a way to have voted for, one does not exclude the other. However, it does exclude this very, I think, straw man type of
yes, you have to differentiate, right? Or not differentiate, you have to be nuanced about it. So, yes, of course, I think a vote for Trump in 2024 is a clear signal that you are willing, as a voter, to support someone who has said and done many racist things. Yeah. And that, you have to own that, right? You can say, I didn't really like that much about him, but to me the economy is more important. And that's it then, okay?
It shows you don't care about race issues, which is still a form of racism.
I don't think it shows that you don't care at all about race issues. I think it shows that you are willing to tolerate racism because you're probably thinking, okay, this doesn't affect me, and sure, that's bad, but it won't be as bad. I mean, I remember, I forget the name now, but I saw this interview after the election with a Hispanic pastor who explained why he supported Trump. And then, he was asked about deportations. The idea that, people now, for example, who have children who were born here in the United States who are American citizens, the journalist asked him, okay, so are you aware that there is a real chance now that these people will be forced out of this country and that they will be deported? And then he said, literally, if that happens, I was promised by the Trump campaign that there would be exceptions for these people, and it's really only about criminals and bad people, quote unquote. And if that happens, I will be the first one, leading the demonstration on the street. And so people, they kind of find ways to reconcile all of that in their minds in order to survive themselves, right? In order to convince themselves, I'm still a good person.
Yeah. And I'm not arguing that they are good people. I think most people aren't good people.
Right.
But
agreed.
I do think, even if you look at it purely from a strategic standpoint, which, I think you should look at it from more than a strategic standpoint, but if that's all you can bring yourself to look at it from, it's a waste if you completely throw out the conservative baby with the alt-right bathwater. You have to, in order to win elections, you need numbers. And this is nothing to do with if Kamala is brat or not, but we'll get back there soon. Oh, this is a good way to bring us back to the topic. You have to be able to build coalitions, which the left likes to talk a lot about, hasn't been doing so much in practice, but which the right, and specifically the alt-right, has been really willing to, ever since the Vietnam War, right? That the alt-right has been more willing to band together. And I think this is something, I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing that leftists and liberals criticize each other so much. I think that's probably, I know it's a lot healthier than what the general right is doing. However, online, the strategy of just pure loyalty.
Kind of closing the ranks.
Yeah, I mean, you have like this one big group of right-wingers all banding together, and this is an oversimplification, but it feels like that. And then you have all these little factions of different people on different sides of the left-wing spectrum. It just doesn't make for a good strategy, but I also can't in good faith say I think it's a bad thing.
Right,
because I don't think blind loyalty is the answer either.
And that is one thing you just described. And add to that the approach to several topics and themes that the Democrats have in this country is a more nuanced approach, right? So it is easier for the Republicans right now to be successful in their use of social media because they are willing to scapegoat, they are willing to lie. Right? I mean...
Because they're the bad guys and we're the good guys.
It has to be said...
we are the good guys.
And I don't even want to laugh about that, because in this case...
we are.
It's really true. Of course, you probably won't find a politician anywhere in the world who has never lied or said something untrue in a political debate. But there is a dramatic difference in how much the Republicans, and Trump in particular, are willing to lie. And as Goebbels, used to say, and in this case, the analogy does work, if, and Hitler himself, of course, said it too, if the lie is big enough, and you say it often enough, it will work. Now, once you bring yourself to that position as a party or as politicians, that you do that and you have no moral qualms, that's when everyone else and the political process of a democracy is automatically endangered, because it's really difficult to deal with that when somebody kind of leaves the political rules to such an enormous extent.
But
right?
It's also like, it's a lose-lose scenario. Like, if you don't engage with them, right, then they win, right? To choose an example I saw recently, they get to put whoever they want on the Supreme Court because they just refused to put someone else, the one who was supposed to go through. You engage with them and you start locking their nominees for the Supreme Court, which we could have done if we'd actually won the... But then you are basically ceding to them that these values of democracy and freedom and justice, they get to destroy that. It's such a crappy situation.
It is. And then in a situation like that, it's extremely important that you find your own message and what you represent, that you find a way to sell that to the American voter in a really convincing manner. And Brat wasn't that. That's my main issue.
What about Dark Brandon? Did you
Dark Brandon? What is that?
It was this thing where people basically started editing Biden online as this like Sigma male, like kind of cool guy, because Biden, he was a bit out of it towards the last however long, but he occasionally gets those zingers in, right? And then people would use that and just go with it.
I'm sorry, why was it called Dark Brandon?
Because of the whole Let's Go Brandon thing that the right did.
I forgot about that. Yes. So that's why I love talking to young people, because these worlds open up for me and I rediscover things. Yes, no, that's fascinating. So that was a whole campaign that was done, or just a thing that happened online?
It was a thing that happened online, and then the Biden campaign sort of tried to embrace that, and it just didn't work. And I was actually thinking about, I have a whole theory on this, but do we want to start getting into those questions to come to a more general take on, was Kamala actually brat? Though I think we already know what her answer is.
Yes, but I have evidence.
You have evidence. Okay. So, we kind of talked today about the right and the left online. I think when we see Trump going on these podcasts, as opposed to Kamala having gone on, I think, 1 or 2 podcasts and also leaning into these memes, why did what Trump do work? I think the question we need to start with in order to answer that is, are there things politicians should learn from influencers or just in general online culture? And if yes, what is that? Like, have the Democrats been learning the wrong lessons? What do you think that is?
Well, I think I'm going to play that ball back into your court, because I like your theory about authenticity in that context. I find that very interesting. I don't want to take that away from you, because you were the one who alerted me to that. So why don't you start with that, and then I can chime in.
Yeah, so my main thing with that was, I think the main thing politicians could learn from influencers is this idea of authenticity. And that's not even like authenticity in terms of that you get to know the real, let's like use Kamala Harris as an example. Like, I don't think any of the like non-political influencers I follow, I'm not under the illusion that I actually know what they're like, but I do feel like I know this version of them very well. I feel like this is someone I have, if not respect, then understanding for.
Yeah.
I do want the Democrats to adopt this more authentic idea of demeanor. I think the problem is that the Democrats, they make a big mistake, and it's a mistake Trump doesn't make. That is, Democrats mistake authenticity with relatability.
Yeah.
They think, oh, Trump isn't relatable, he's like a millionaire, he has his golden toilet, blah blah blah. But that's not it. Trump doesn't try to be relatable. He's very comfortable in his position of I worked
for this.
Yeah,
he didn't.
He did.
I mean, he worked, but
do we know that though?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
He had a
reality TV show.
Yeah, but he also had a big advantage right from when he was born.
So my thing is, Democrats, you said this during the last episode, you don't want to hear their success story, how they started from the...
Exactly.
Like, that's trying to be relatable. I don't
Such an excellent point.
think people in general, I don't think young people, I know I don't want my politicians to be relatable. I want them to be politicians, right? I want them to be smarter than me. It hasn't happened before, but one can dream. I want them to have experience, I want them to be part of the system. I want them to know the system, all that stuff. And for that relatability factor, you can throw that out the window because nobody wants that, right? What I think, you can be authentic without being relatable by ditching the condescension. You can sympathize with someone without empathizing with them,
or without pretending that you have been there.
Exactly.
Right? I mean, what Kamala Harris tried to brand herself as this person who came out of nothing, this poor mother who barely made it and who just worked hard and was this professor. That was not the real story. You know, she comes actually from a pretty well-to-do background and a lot of cultural capital on the way because of the educational background of both of her parents, I believe, right? And just picture as a potential voter, instead of hearing, oh my God, it was so hard, but I did it, and the neighbor helped us, and that's how we did it. Picture hearing, you know what, I had a pretty good start because I got lucky, I got this and that, and I know many people don't. And you know what, that sucks, and we need to make sure that people like you, who didn't have the help that I had, that you get the same opportunity. Or I mean, to me, immediately, I would be like, wow, what a breath of fresh air. Instead of always hearing that same tired American dream story.
Exactly.
Come on. We all know that's
and also, it's just,
a rare
it's
thing.
Just,
and
especially
it has to be
among politicians.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
Just, and I think another thing that I was just thinking about in the context of authenticity instead of relatability, you see that clip of Trump on Theo Vaughn's podcast where Theo Vaughn talks about his cocaine addiction, I believe it was. Trump didn't, I think, relate to Theo Vaughn, but he seemed empathetic towards him. And I think that's so much more important. You don't say, oh, I had a cousin who had a cocaine addiction, so I know what it's like. Yeah. But actually just listen, because it seemed like you care.
Exactly. It seemed like he did care, but he cared while at the same time communicating, I think what you did was really wrong. And I think that's exactly what many Americans want to hear and want in their leader. Just like you explained it, I couldn't agree more. And I just want to add to this by saying, I think Trump is an extremely authentic politician. Because, let's be honest, how many people think, oh, we don't get to see the real Trump?
Probably
zero. They are more thinking, I wish
I wish he would take the real Trump.
I wish he would leave his authentic self at home for once and just pretend to be a decent human being. Right? So yes, I think that's a really, really important point. You kind of feel like, okay, I know who this man is, and you know.
Yeah. Then, other than that, I have 2 more tips for my beloved Democrats. 1, not every conversation has to be a tool to get the votes out. True. That's just something I feel very conscious about when it all feels so polished. It's so, it just feels very opportunistic. And I'm not saying the Republicans don't do that, because they totally do. But it's something I personally like to see changed in my party. And then, in general, the more you can lean into the fact that you are not like us, like politicians are different than us in many important ways, but in a way that isn't, you're saying that's better or worse, but just acknowledging that. It's the whole thing that liberals and leftists do say a lot, this whole acknowledge your privilege. But it's not even like in this self-flagellating way, it's just in a, look, these are all my cards, I'm setting them out on the table, let's actually talk about policy instead of me, right?
Exactly. No, I think that's good advice.
If anyone wants to hire me as their campaign manager, I have no job right now. I'm looking for work.
Just forget about that, okay?
You think I'd be a bad campaign manager?
I don't know if I want you to be a campaign manager. But again, obviously your decision.
Sure.
But can I just say, one more thing about the whole online sphere? It's interesting what is happening now, right? You have this move of many Democrats to Blue Sky, right? This platform that kind of promises this home for all Democrats, kind of the equivalent now to Truth Social. Right. But what is the difference? Truth Social is owned and completely controlled by Trump himself, right? Yeah, he founded that, so I'm assuming that he's pretty much in charge of it.
I don't know as much about this as I should.
Well, me neither, but I'm assuming that is correct. And of course, it's also it has a kind of a copycat feel now, to me at least. I'm watching this, so I'm very curious to see if that will be successful. And I want to reiterate what I said before, that at the end of the day, it's the message itself that I really do still think counts the most. And look at Blue Sky, the name. It's so dreamy, it's so, everything is wonderful.
It's giving moral arc of the universe.
Yeah, but then compare it to Truth Social. The politician that lied the most in recent US history founds a new social media platform and calls it Truth Social. That's awful, but it shows once again this instinct, right? Yes, I don't mind lying. Talking now from his perspective, but I'm never gonna admit that I lie, obviously. He's gonna say that immigrants eat cats and dogs, and I'm not ever gonna back down, even with the most absurd statements. And that is what I meant before. If you have people in the political process that get into powerful positions that are using these kind of strategies, that's a challenge that would be very difficult for anyone. And so I want to kind of say the Democrats also are in a really, really difficult position, right? It's not just about not being able to use social media well and stuff like that. Even though this also played a role, as we will come now to in our
just
closing segment, right? Go ahead.
In my research, this person there argued that this was a left-right thing. I think I've seen instances of this on both the left and the right. But basically, there was this argument that, like, Democrats, they have this very idealized version of what debate should be. Like, debate should lead to truth. And so truth is the most important thing. Then, I don't even know if it's the conservative sphere, but it's the conservative sphere after Trump, through Trump's influence. It's much more moral certainty trumps truth, right? So probably if you just keep answering in one sentence, like, lies, and then someone comes here with, like, 2 minutes of deconstructing those lies, and then you respond again with another lie. Of course, like, if you actually look at the content, it'll be like, I know which side is right, and it's not the person who's responding in one sentence lies. But if you're just looking at it from a distance, like scrolling through your phone, whatever,
Yes.
the person who just, like, they're not even really they don't even seem to, like, it's like your argumentation is so ridiculous that I'll just keep, speaking my truth, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's something also where I agree. I think the Democrats have a really tough job because obviously I don't want them to just start lying. That's what I like about the party.
But they need to counter that in a powerful way
Mm-hmm.
and probably lean into a bit more populism themselves. You can be a populist without lying. That's possible.
Bernie Sanders, our Lord and Savior. Okay, I did want to ask you this one question because I do just have to ask this question because I love the song so much and I don't know, it was relevant. So, will the revolution be televised or, live streamed on Twitch or whatever? I think that's just something I want to hear, aka is major change possible online? What do you think?
No.
That was my answer too.
I mean, it's a tool.
Yeah.
And you should wield it when you want to effect political change. But at the end of the day, that alone cannot affect change. And we have seen that.
That was that article you showed me, that Small Changes article?
Malcolm Gladwell's piece from more than 10 years ago by now.
Where he was like talking about how online, it's very low commitment activism. A real change, like the stuff you saw during the civil rights movement with the boycotts and the sit-ins and stuff, that was all high risk. That was high commitment. Mm-hmm. And that's not really possible online. Online, everyone gets to feel like they're making a big difference in being an activist without actually having to risk much and without actually having to commit as much time and effort. Mm-hmm. At least that's I
think you can use it well to mobilize people.
Yeah.
But you need, by mobilization I mean get people to a point where they actually are willing to leave their house then or vote for you. I mean, then they don't have to leave the house anymore in many states now. So I mean, in a more nuanced way I would respond to, it depends what you want to do with it, right? And what you mean by political change. Is it something as a tool that it can work to get out the vote? Yes, I do believe that. I do believe that. Especially now, since it can work in the context with mail-in vote, right?
My advice is, if you want a revolution, literally touch grass. I mean that in so many different senses. You're not going to get that. Do you get that, Joe? I don't know if you do.
I thought I got the image, touch grass, be
but it's just this
yourself.
line, if someone's too chronically online, you tell them to go touch grass.
Yeah, that makes sense to me, yeah.
Okay.
Even though I wasn't familiar with that.
Yeah. Sometimes I underestimate
you going outside and touching grass, and I would think, that would be a good thing.
Okay. How do you feel about some rapid fire questions? I just want your opinion on them.
All right.
Just, quick.
Okay.
Can a politician be cool?
Yes.
Really? Of course. Okay. Do young people want politicians to be cool?
Not so much.
Mm-hmm. And then finally, should politicians be cool?
No.
No.
How about you?
I have a whole argument about this. I don't think politicians should be cool because young people will never find politicians cool. I think they might find, maybe a more populist politician. Or
Obama was perceived as cool by many.
Yeah, but now he's not considered cool anymore. People are like, oh, he's an annoying lib who, I don't know. Mm-hmm. I'm just saying, I think that in general, the majority of young people will never really find someone cool who is that much of a part of the establishment. I just think that's inherently at odds with each other. So if you want to be cool, they will make you cool in their own way if they like you.
Bernie Sanders is a good example, right?
I don't think Bernie Sanders is cool per se, but I think people just like him anyway.
And decided this is a cool guy.
Yeah. So basically, my whole thing is with, for example, Dark Brandon. Again, Biden's not cool. But people were like, you know what, we're going to make him cool, even though it's kind of making fun of him at the same time. Mm-hmm. So then you want to lean into the joke without ruining it. So that's a whole other, you could talk a lot about what that means, but I'm just going to leave that out there. I also think you can try as hard as you want to be cool in the eyes of young people. If they don't like your policies, if you're not talking to them about the things they care about, climate change, Palestine, what else do we care about? We care about stuff, I promise.
The economy.
Job
opportunities.
Job opportunities.
Education.
Yes, college costs, all that stuff. Like, I think we can both agree, right here, I know it's a controversial statement, but Trump is not cool.
No.
He's not a cool guy. I don't think he is cool in any ways. Have you seen him try to sell his NFTs? It's just not cool, right?
He's kind of the
antithesis.
Mm-hmm.
But his young fans ignore that because he goes where they are, so onto these podcasts, right? And then he validates their concerns and their bigotry, right? So he reaches them where they are.
And also some young people aren't cool. And they don't care so much about what you and other young people perceive as cool. I think that's an important point too.
You see, she's talking about herself here. She's always like, oh, when I was young, I didn't care about what was cool. I just was cool. No. But that's not true. Everyone cares.
This is a misrepresentation of my younger self. But I'm talking about a huge segment of young people who do not fit that idea of I am young and I think Brat and the song by Charlie XCX is cool. There is an enormous amount of young people living in this country who do not like Charlie XCX.
And you would know this because of the many research statistics you looked at.
Yes. But first of all, you know why I come to this conclusion is because I also looked at exit polls in terms of motivations and the religious vote. And that reminded me once again that there is a huge segment of the US populace, including the young populace, that identify as Christian. Okay? And when you look at these, you know, I think they're about 60%. And you look at...
Really?
Mm-hmm. And I think so. You might want to check me on that. And when you look at how they voted much, much more Republican than Democrat. And I think it's something that we underestimate because I, as someone who works at a university and deals with young people on a daily basis, but this is just one representative group of young people, namely the young people who actually make it to college. There is, however, a large segment of people, including young people, who do not go to college, right? And who do not get these degrees and who are really rooted in this. And it doesn't even have to be Christian. You know, there is also about 10% who said other religion. But taken together, you just see what a huge percentage of people are religious and then, again, are not pursuing a college degree or cannot pursue a college degree. And we need to see these people too. And these people are not going to be necessarily turned on by the Kamala campaign deciding, okay, we're going to go green in order to tap into the whole Charlie XCX thing. And you know what? I looked at a few numbers and I want to mention them here. On November 5th, also on the day of the election, they looked at various posts. So on X, the best liked tweet by Harris got 318,000 likes. Trump's got more than 1 million. On Facebook, Harris's post got 18,000 likes. Trump's 160,000. On Instagram, Harris got 569,000. Trump 2.1 million. I mean, these are staggering numbers and just shows that something was really going wrong there, right?
Yeah, I 100% agree. And I don't know if this is what you're suggesting, but I don't think the solution to that is to go after the Christian vote.
No, I'm not suggesting anything. At this point, I was just diagnosing something.
Yeah.
I think it's just when you ask the question, was Kamala actually Brat? I just also want to bring in the discussion. Is it a good strategy to want to sell yourself as Brat? Would it maybe have been better to say, oh, thank you, and not use that as my campaign slogan?
That's actually what I wrote. Something similar. I wrote, well, she wasn't Brat because, you know.
Yeah.
But also, Brat to me is not a strategy, it's a positive response. And I think she saw it, or her campaign saw it as a strategy instead of, you know, this positive response where you can do like a sort of nod to it, right? And I think in general, she treated the internet as this, like, way to come up with these, like, jokes and memes that her campaign could harness to be seen as cool by young people, instead of a medium through which to talk to young people.
And I also, I agree. And I wonder if she and her campaign strategists actually bothered to really look into what that brat really stood for. You know, because in my research for this episode, I was like, I'm really curious. I was really trying to find out, is there like a clear definition? And then I thought, okay, well, what did Charlie XCX actually said about this? And do you know this?
I know what she said, but...
I mean, because what you summarized before, I thought was, and again, I like Charlie XCX, so please don't hate me, Charlie XCX, because I know you're watching this. But here's what she said. I wrote this down. Brat is a concept that represents a person who might have and this is a quote now, a pack of zigs, a big lighter, whatever that is, BIC, a big lighter, and a strappy white top with no bra. End of quote. And then a little later on, continues, who feels like herself but maybe also has a breakdown, but kind of like parties through it, is very honest, very blunt, a little bit volatile, like does dumb things. But it's Brat. You are Brat. That's Brat. Okay, excuse me.
God.
That sounds cool for a party. But
Mama,
do you really want to be, as a politician, do you want people to associate that?
Well, I don't want to talk about that because Trump, he associates himself with crazy stuff. And I don't think that...
How did Trump get into this?
No, I'm just saying, I don't think Kamala Harris, the reason why she didn't win more young people's votes is because she associated herself with partying with no bra on. I think the whole respectability politics, we lost that a long time, or we won it, and it didn't matter a long time ago.
I don't care about the bra thing. I was more stuck on, does dumb things, party through. No, is that really the view of a politician?
No, but sometimes things take on a cultural meaning of their own. I think,
and that's the meaning you started with, right?
Yeah, and also I don't think that, again, I agree with you, I don't think Kamala Harris should have used it as like a strategy to reach out to young people, but I don't like this idea that she shouldn't associate herself with that sort of stuff.
We are in complete agreement. I am not talking about that she should have said, oh no, I don't want to be Brat. I'm talking about maybe not making the decision, okay, let's use this tweet and completely, because as I understood it, they turned this into their headquarters, right?
Just for a bit.
For a bit, okay. I thought that was a permanent thing with the green color.
I don't know
if that. I mean, it doesn't make a difference.
They just used it.
If I had been a strategist at this point, I would have said, that's great. Let's kind of make a tweet or, a sub-tweet or whatever and say, loving it. But
like McDonald's?
Exactly. Exactly. They could have done two things at the same time, but then also keep some, not take it and put it at the top of their representation. Is all what I'm saying. Because when I think of young people who are also social media users, but who, for example, I go back to this, are very devout Christians, and they don't like that kind of stuff, and I think but shouldn't that be on the radar of a strategist as well in such a close election where you feel like I already have the people who are Brat.
No, they don't.
Okay,
because those people are either tend to be more apolitical or very far on the left. Then B, I just have completely lost faith for this, we're trying to appeal to as broad a spectrum as possible by not accidentally insulting anybody. I think what you do is you try to, through your policies, connect with as many people as possible.
Yes.
And then...
But that's not a policy.
It's not a policy. And that's why I don't have an issue with her using that for the Twitter header.
But then
I'm talking more as a representation of that being one of the main things she did online.
Yeah.
That bothers me. But I don't think it was a mistake. I don't think people were like, well, I was going to vote for Kamala Harris, but then I saw she embraces doing cocaine. And it's just, I don't think it had that much...
An embracing of cocaine.
Okay, but she talks a lot about... Charlie XCX talks a lot about doing cocaine. That's what I had nothing to do. For me, it wasn't the fact that she did the Brat thing, it was the fact that she did the Brat thing and kind of stopped there.
Yeah. That's a fair point.
Yeah.
I can certainly agree with that.
I think I'm getting defensive because I love Brat.
I know how to push a button.
She does.
I
even know any
kept
of
that
the
to the end.
songs from Brat.
No.
Okay, so one thing I did still want to bring up before we move on to our predictions for the future is my answer to the whole Brat thing. I think, was Kamala actually Brat? The answer is no, not because I disagree with the way she interacted with the term, but more that I think Brat is a very fine line, and so is this idea of a cool politician. And I don't think she managed to walk that line in any sort of capacity. So for me, it's about all these tensions, right? So you want to be strong and vulnerable, but you don't want to be weak, right? You want to be authentic and professional, but don't try to be relatable, right? Because that's just doesn't work. Be aware and in on the joke, but don't overuse it.
But that's exactly what I meant with the whole thing just now,
Yeah.
Brad. So once again, we are in total agreement. Young
Yeah,
and
but
old.
she says it in this, like, you know,
I say it in this
hate
condescending manner.
Brat.
She says it in a Brad manner. So
I say it in the...
absolutely.
I don't think most young people expect a particularly cool politician. I think they want someone who genuinely engages with them. And you can do the memes, you can make the jokes, but you can't stop there. You have to, you have the policies to back it up. You have to go on the platforms to share those policies in a way that can be a bit of a risk, like going on Joe Rogan. I know that would have been
Yes.
a risk for her, and I don't know if she would have been able to, like, pull it off, but I think Democrats should, in general, in the future, be able to just talk like human beings, you know?
Yeah, I know what you mean. So please, all Democrats, politicians out there, consider coming to our podcast.
But only if you act like a real person.
We turn you into an authentic
we're like
person and rob you of all your relatability.
We're like that fairy in Pinocchio that turns him into a real boy. We're like, okay, predictions for the future. Last thing. Right? Do you have anything else you want to talk about?
No, and I'm a little caught off guard by the predictions for the future.
I put that in the outline.
I must have missed the last line then. Oh.
Remember, we always do the predictions for the
Yes.
future. Yeah, okay.
Go ahead, ask the question.
So what are your predictions for the future?
In terms of social media use?
Yeah, and in politics, yeah.
I think social media is here to stay in the political future. I do think that the Democrats need to up their game in this. They need to become better at that. I think that includes not just the politicians, but the cultural, political left as a whole in this country. Because I was just thinking, sure, Kamala Harris could have gone on to Joe Rogan and the other podcasters, but let's also not forget that these are all podcasters, if I understood it correctly, in the so-called manosphere, right? So that's already leaning towards the very right.
That's
so
very
it's
true.
kind of a home game for Trump to get onto one of these podcasts.
You know what? That's a really good
right. It's a very
point.
different ball game for Kamala Harris. But where are the equivalents of these podcasters on the on the left?
It's us.
I don't want to become that known, but yes, we would need people like that, and I don't think they exist. I mean, you know more about that than I, but I feel like they have an advantage right there on the playing field, and I think that needs to happen. That people need to organize in that realm as well, and I hope I'm really poor at prediction, as my students can attest, because when I try to predict the future, I usually can, but I hope that will be the lesson taken away from this.
Yeah, I find it interesting because for my predictions for the future, I wrote down two things: my best case scenario and my worst case scenario.
Okay, let's hear it.
My best case scenario is what you described. The Democrats, they do have quite a bit of catching up to do. As we established at the start, the alt-right did build the framework for things like the manosphere, and the Democrats do not have an equivalent of that yet. But we've had a good start since, I want to say, like 2016. It's been getting better. I'm going to list some of my favorite examples. On YouTube, you have ContraPoints, Natalie Wynn, who you do know.
Yes, I like Natalie Wynn a lot.
I, as a politician, would be thrilled if I would be able to get her involved in any capacity. Then On Twitch, also, it's still a more right-wing dominated space politically, I believe. But you do have someone like this guy, Hasanabi, who's the nephew of the guy from the Young Turks. I have complicated feelings about him, but he certainly is a voice for the left.
Yep.
And then on TikTok, I don't even know if this guy's that big on TikTok, but like Yuval is this guy who I thought did some interesting political stuff and goes viral quite a bit from the left. You also have this like Dean Wilkerson, who I just recently found out about, but he does like debates on TikTok Live, I think, against like people on the right.
Okay.
So there are things that have been starting over the past few years, and I do think in the best case scenario that will continue to grow until the Democrats have a similar platform on the internet to work with. Then here's my worst case scenario. The Democrats never manage to achieve what the alt-right and the Republicans achieved, and that's because left-wing policy is less conducive to the internet. So I'm starting off real strong, real controversial with the left values purity culture at the moment a lot more. The right has no standards. So,
and lots of claims to moral certainty
and
at the same, because you know, they would see themselves as having these standards, right?
That's but they're like, they'll do the whole coalition building a lot more effectively. Then that was actually my next one. The left, they are really focused on the truth, which is usually more complicated, and the right on moral certainty, which is usually a lot easier to just yell about online.
Yes.
Then the left tends to be rather poor debaters, and the right tend to be kind of dirty debaters, in that they use a lot of strawman tactics, a lot of logical fallacies, a lot of just telling lies. And I don't think the Democrats, we have as many strong debaters who are able to deal with those tactics. That goes together with the right, the short accusations online, the left responds with long explanations. And it's just, the problem is, if this were like the Conservative Party, say 30 years ago, where they still pretended to be good people, then, or at least kind of worked within the standards set up. I don't know, 30 years ago, however long ago that was. Maybe it was never. But with how the right is right now, it's really difficult to, given the fact that if you're kind of working from a place where you believe the ends don't justify the means. The Republicans believe the ends justify the means. I don't think a lot of the people on the left do.
And so basically we need new ends? Is that what you're saying?
Oh, no. I'm saying I don't think we should change our policy on that. I don't think that the ends justify the means. I agree with the general Democratic take on that. But that makes it a lot more difficult to conduct yourself online as a political entity. So I think we need to come up with completely different strategies, because ours aren't working right now, and we don't want to use their strategies, because that would be stooping to a level where we just become them, right?
Yeah. But that is the worst case scenario.
That's the worst case scenario.
I'm going to give a prediction now and say, despite what I said before about predictions, because I also don't want to end on such a defeatist note, I do think it's perfectly possible to counter this. And yes, that is all true. You know, the game is kind of rigged in their favor at this point when it comes to the online world, and the rhetoric is easier and stuff. But yes, there are ways to counter that, because at the end of the day, there are voters out there who don't necessarily just buy into lies, but who are concerned about their lives and their livelihoods, and is their decision on who to vote for on that. And again, I think it's important to keep in mind that there are people out there who voted for Obama twice and then voted for Trump twice. You might not like these people in terms of, you know,
I love everybody. I'm
just saying, you know, when you approach with this moral purity, you know, you can make a philosophical case, of course, that that's not okay. How can your values in terms of so many things shift like that? But in the political process, that also carries a possibility and opportunity where you can just say, okay, we can win them over for our good side, right? And we can do that without engaging in xenophobia and the scapegoating of immigrants and telling one lie after the other. That is possible.
So would that be your answer to the question, how do you fix America without becoming the alt-right?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's kind of the note I wanted to end it on. I personally would also like to fix America without becoming the alt-right. And
Yeah,
I just wrote here, play on your terms.
Yes,
Don't
and
let
because
them.
that already upsets me. The question is already a suggestive question. Can you fix America without becoming the alt-right? The alt-right did not fix America,
I'm
and
not-
they won't. I'm just using you a bit of as a straw man here. But I'm just saying, when they hear a question like that, they sit in their little homes and celebrate.
Well, we have to fix America because the alt-right broke it.
It's not the alt-right that
Okay,
broke it.
someone
It's
broke
the mainstream that is responsible for what
Yeah.
happened in the United States. The alt-right is happy about it because they kind of got their
But they
messages
have
and
less
their
control
stuff.
than they want us to
Exactly.
think.
Absolutely. But there is always a much larger chunk in the middle that is flexible, morally flexible, malleable. And this is, in the political process, in my opinion, what you need to appeal to.
Yeah.
Right? And that's perfectly possible. Yes, I do think
Yeah.
so.
I think for me it was a kind of interesting process reading about this.
Absolutely.
Because by the end of my research I was like totally convinced like, oh, the alt-right are the reason like Trump won. Because it's so easy to kind of think that when you read all these things
Yeah.
about all these strategies and how they're so much more kind of put together than you want them to be.
Yeah.
But talking with you I think also really helped me see that that's also one of their strategies, overplaying
Exactly.
their hand.
Yeah.
No, that's not what that phrase means, but like...
This is appearing larger
Yeah.
than they are and more
Yeah.
in control and more intimidating. And as for what I got out of this,
Yeah.
I think that I now have a better idea of what brat is. And I think I'm gonna start self-identifying as brat.
Maybe you should listen to the album first, then you can decide if you want to be brat or not.